Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik, we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. We also host a clubhouse every Friday at 4 Eastern, and this week, along with Rabbi Adam Mintz and Michael Posnick, we explore the mystery of the Red Heifer, which purifies the defiled and defiles the purified, and apparently defies reason and logic. We try to figure out exactly what about it is so confounding to the rabbis and even God on high. So put on your cowboy hat and hosey on down as we explore the enigma of the Red Heifer, salvation through death, breaking the cycle. So welcome one and all to Madlik, another week of disruptive Torah. And this week, the parsha is parshat Chukat, which literally means well, we're going to find out what it means, but Chukat is of the law. And the law that is under discussion is the law of the Red Heifer. And those of you who know your Old Testament know that the laws of purity are a big feature of biblical Judaism, temple Judaism, and those laws of purity relate mostly to impurity that is gotten from death or anything to do with death. And the Red Heifer is, as we are told in chapter Numbers 19, is the antidote. And what happens is the priest takes this pure red heifer that has never carried a yoke, and slaughters it and sprinkles the blood and then mixes the blood with some water and hissop and other cedar wood and crimson stuff. And then it is set aside and used to sprinkle miraculously on those people who have come into contact with death. And that should be a pretty straightforward thing. It might sound very strange to us moderns, but many things in the temple in terms of a sacrificial cult sound strange. But for some reason, and that's what the subject matter of today is, this one is singled out as being stranger than strange, and therefore the focus is on the word that God says, Numbers 19:2, this is the ritual law that the Lord has commanded, zote Chukat hatorah, and all of the commentators, and we are going to struggle with the fact that the sense is this is a strange chok. This is the showcase, the poster child of a law that has no rationale, in fact is irrational, and you have to obey because God commanded it. So I am going to stop right there. And I should add, I missed the key point, or at least what is taken to be the key point, that the Kohen who goes ahead and prepares the sacrifice of the red heifer, and his helpmate who cleans his garments, anybody involved in the preparation of this elixir who is going to take away the impurity of death, himself becomes impure. And so I'm going to open it up to discussion. Rabbi, what about this struck all of the commentators as so strange that it had to be singled out as an example of a law that has no logic?
So that is such an interesting question. The idea of a chok, of a law that has no logic. The idea that the same thing that makes people pure makes people impure, I think really bothered the rabbis. They could not get their arms around that because basically purity, impurity, and impurity are opposites. So how is it possible that the very same thing that can make you pure can also make you impure? I think that really bothered the rabbis. And I think that that's what led them to call this thing a chok. By the way, the word chok in just means a law. So para aduma, the red heifer, is really a unique situation, a unique case. And it's this idea, this kind of confusion between purity and impurity. And I think that's a key term, the idea of confusion.
So, first of all, I mean, I love the fact that you talk about a confusion, but what came to my mind, and I wasn't actually even going to talk about this, isn't there a fine line between the profane and the pure? In other words, whether we've talked about it before, the pride of following God's laws and the pride of in oneself. A harlot, a temple harlot, is called a kadesha, which comes from the same word as kadosh. I mean, it is true that you could say, well, doesn't this happen all the time? That something that is close to pure but doesn't quite make it actually becomes profane. But I think that, I mean, if we look at the commentators, like Rashi is the first one, he doesn't seem to imply that it was troubling so much to the rabbis as it was to our detractors. He says, because Satan and the nations of the world taunt Israel, saying, what is this commandment and what reason is there for it? On this account, we say it's a chok, that God, using the word chok, all of the commentaries say it's also something that you kind of niche into stone. You chokakti. I have kind of carved this rule. It's not for you to question. But do you think there's an aspect of this that isn't so much that it was troubling to the rabbis as it was troubling, or it was a point of polemical discussion where people would come to the Jews and say, this thing is so strange, your religion makes no sense?
You think that's what that this is just interesting. I'm thinking about that for a minute. You think that maybe we're worried about what other people will say about us. Do you think that generally the Torah's worried about what other people will say about us?
You know, you wouldn't think so. I mean, on the flip side,
I wouldn't think so. I'm surprised that you suggested that, because I wouldn't have thought so.
So, I mean, if you look at Bamidbar Rabbah, which is another source in the source sheet, it says, a Gentile asked Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, these rituals you do, they seem like witchcraft. You bring a heifer, burn it, crush it up, take its ashes. And if you read that whole thing, his thing is not so much that something that is impure becomes pure and impurifies the person who's doing it. He seems to be bothered by sprinkling some water and poof, you're instantaneously pure. So there are two instances in the commentaries. Both of them have this polemical aspect to it, and that's why I don't think I came up with it on my own. I was struck by that myself when I was looking at the sources. And before I let you respond, do the rabbis care what the nations say? I think yes. There's a verse in Deuteronomy that says, Ki hi chatmatchem ubinatchem be'enei hagoyim, that the Torah is the wisdom of the Jews in the eyes of the nations. The amount of times that Moses argues with God when God's ready to blot out the Jews, and he goes, God, what's everybody going to say? You took us out of Egypt and you killed these people? So I do think there is a strong element of what will the Goyim say certainly in the discussion about this law, but in general.
You see, I guess my question is like this. Are we worried about what the Goyim will say, or is that just a midrashic trick to kind of emphasize a problem that we have with these laws, and we kind of then put it in the mouths of the Goyim?
Okay.
Now, I don't know how much difference that makes, but I'm just raising that as a possibility.
I mean, I think I was intrigued not so much by this sense of, and of course, when we say, what will the Goyim think, we're really speaking like Jews who have lived in exile for 2,000 years. I don't think that would be fair for this young movement of Jews in the desert. But they did feel that they had a movement, I believe. And the rabbis, too, were in a world where maybe Judaism already, because it was parlaying itself as the believer in this one invisible God, maybe it was even taken to a higher standard. But in any case, there seems to be a question of the benchmark, the level of Judaism, and does this somehow conflicts with it? And I think you touched upon that by saying, you know, we like to have an ideology, we like to have a religion that is squeaky clean, everything fits into a place. And this is not so understandable. So I think the other aspect of it that came up in my research is what big of a problem it is. And this, of course, is the famous Pesikta, which says that Moshe goes up into the heights of heaven. You know, there are a few midrashim that say, what did Moses do 40 days and 40 nights when he was up in heaven? And so here's one of the renderings. He goes up and he sees the Holy One, blessed be he, is engaged in the study of the Torah, and he's studying the passage of the Red Heifer, citing a law in the name of the sage who stated it. And Moses said before him, Master of the universe, worlds above and worlds below are in your domain, yet you sit and cite a law ascribed to flesh and blood. So this, and Michael, I know you love the drama and you love the theater of the Torah. This is a play, I think, of going up to heaven and seeing God, number one, studying man's Torah. Well, is it man's Torah? It was Torah that God wrote and gave to man, but here he is engaged in the study of the Red Heifer. It, so to speak, keeps God up at night. What do we make on that, on either a theological level or on a in terms of the discussion that we're having?
Well, and I want to just add to that question, Geoffrey. Why does the heifer have to be red? I mean, does that seem significant? Is it just because a red heifer is so rare, so therefore he wants to show you that you have to go out of your way to find a red heifer? Is that what it's about? Or is there something deeper in there?
Yeah. I mean, last week I said that Techelet was the Pantone color of Judaism. And now this week, here we are, we're discussing red. I think, in my mind anyway, that this has to do with life and death. There's no question about it. One is using the red heifer to take away whatever it is that death tarnishes us with, the impurity that we get from death. And so in my mind, whether it's the blood or whether it's the color of the heifer itself, that's my natural association was again with the blood. But again, there's the fact that it's impurifies the pure. It's the fact that you take these drops of water and magically make somebody pure. And then there's the other element, which is that it's outside of the temple. All of those three things, you almost get the sense that this is a solution in search of a problem. It's almost as though there's something strange about this law. What is it? It keeps God up at night. The nations of the world taunt us with it. It's almost as hard. The problem is almost harder than the problem is almost harder than the problem itself. To me, that's what's kind of struck me.
Well, I mean, to rephrase what you just said, Geoffrey, it seems like the Torah makes the red heifer a lot more complicated than it has to be. We could accomplish the same thing by having a ritual that was much more direct and much more simple. Why are rituals generally complicated? You know, you think about the Paschal lamb. You have to put the blood on the doorpost. You have to eat the whole thing. There are a lot of details in these sacrificial rituals. You think that's important, or you think that's just the way it was?
Michael, what are your thoughts?
My thought right now is this, that I find that this question of the red heifer, with all the energy we have to try to, quotes, figure it out, is an opportunity for a little humility. Certain things we say we understand, and they seem to fit in with the entire system, and we're content about that. But here is the exception, which in a certain way proves the rule. And so I would say that it's not to be solved in that sense, because it is outside the possibility of solution. It is a way of acknowledging the fact that there's a space, there's a place for us to not know, and to either just accept or to surrender to it, or to let it go. So that's my thought right now. It's not to solve the problem. It's just simply to say, all right, we'll make an effort, but it's a place where I have to surrender what I think I know and what my mind thinks it's know. I think it knows, thinks it's know. Anyway, that's English. So that's my thoughts are right now.
Well, thank you for that.
I like the fact that it's a puzzle not to be solved. No matter how hard you bang your head against the wall, it's not going to be solved. You have to surrender to it if you want to.
It's definitely...
That's a nice explanation, that the complexity is a reflection of the need to surrender. If we understood it, there wouldn't be as much surrender, because what you understand, you don't surrender to, you understand it. But if you don't understand it, then you have to surrender. I like that a lot.
Well, you want to understand everything?
No, I like that.
So I would like to play the devil's advocate a little bit and continue along the trend that I was looking at, is that the problem of the Red Heifer is not so apparent, and that we might be misguided in what we understand the problem to be. So let me look at, there were, for instance, if we look at the law of conservation of matter, for every reaction, there is equal and opposite counteraction. Saadia Gaon says, I don't get what is so complex about this whole rule. He says that, heat can make certain foodstuffs soft, but you boil an egg, it gets hard. Food can be beneficial to someone who's hungry and detrimental to someone who's already eaten a meal. Certainly medicine can benefit the sick and hurt the healthy. The world is full of things that can affect different people in different ways. He doesn't use this example, but it's a known parable or saying in the Torah that for those who are zoche, the Torah is a sam hachayim. It's a medicine of life. And for those who are not zoche, it's a sam mavet. It's hurtful. We can study the same text. We can be exposed to the same revelation, and we can take away from it two different opposing things. And I think that's an amazing, beautiful lesson. Maybe it's sophisticated enough to become a little bit of a mystery and something that is not obvious at first glance. We were talking a little bit before we started today. I'm reminded of the wonderful expression that's attributed to pretty much everyone out there of comforting the afflicted and afflicting the comforted. Is that the role of a leader, of a rabbi, of a journalist? So I think that at a certain level, it's not necessarily something that is so far beyond our ability to fathom. It's certainly not something that would keep us awake at night in terms of something being bothersome. It's a sophisticated point of the world that it means different things to different people, that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so I just wonder, what is it that Michael or you, Rabbi, feel is so complex about this message that something can make one person impure and the other pure?
Geoffrey, I was thinking before about wine, for example, something really fairly simple, even though we don't understand what it is exactly. You can use wine for purity and you can use wine for impurity. And then I was thinking about language, Geoffrey. We can use this gift of language to bring death to people. We can embarrass and shame people, which I think the Talmud equates with killing someone, really. Or we can use language as we are here to uplift and nourish and raise. In that sense, the ambiguity or the complexity is in a certain way practically how it's used. I don't know if this relates exactly to the question of the heifer, but it strikes me that we have a certain responsibility to use what we have in an appropriate way if we know that there's an appropriate way. So that's what comes up for me. I'm not seduced by what you call complexity. I think, as I said before, I think what we're calling complexity is just something that the mind says, oh, this is complex because I don't understand it. And I'm perfectly happy to not understand. And then I have a choice, as I say, whether to do it or not do it. So that's where I'm coming from today. Thank you.
Well, I love the fact that you brought it back to you raised the stakes and you brought it back to death. And you talked about, sometimes the stakes are high. And if you embarrass somebody, the Talmud says it is like killing them. And so I think that, to me, the secret of the challenge of the Parah Aduma cannot be far away from the challenge of death itself. And I don't want to raise the stakes too high, but to me, one of the clues is in a piece of Talmud that ends the story of the Parah Aduma. And the next story that follows the death of the story of the Parah Aduma is the death of Miriam. And Rabbi Ame says, why was the Torah portion that describes the death of Miriam juxtaposed to the portion dealing with the red heifer? To tell you, just as the red heifer atones for sin, so too the death of the righteous atones for sin. And it seems to me that what is keeping Kiviyachol, as if to say God, up at night, and what is making the challenge here is that in the world that the Torah is operating on, there seems to be this inextricable connection between salvation and death. So that it comes out of a world where there was child sacrifice, and obviously it has a whole life of sacrifice itself in the temple. And somehow, if you've sinned, to redeem yourself, something has to be killed. And getting back to your point, Rabbi Adam, about the question of the red here, it seems that in order to this whole notion that the death of the righteous atones, I think we're really at a crossroads here, that both Judaism and Christianity, at the same moment that Roman was saying, this sounds crazy, this sounds strange, was struggling with, how do you get salvation? Do you need someone to die in order for someone else to live? And there are books that have been written lately. John Levinson wrote a whole book about the idea of the death of the son in Old Testament, as opposed to only in Christianity. He says this didn't come up, the idea that a god or a tzaddik or a righteous person has to die in order for salvation to be reached. And he traces it through the Akedah, the sacrifice of Isaac, where he actually wasn't sacrificed. But the idea, again, that someone has to become tumah in order for someone else to become tahor. And I think that's what, to my mind, it's not so much just a kind of cognitive or an intellectual question or mystery. It's something that really hurts home. There's so much in religion in general, but certainly Old Testament Judeo-Christian religion, about this need for something bad to happen in order for something good to happen. Whether it's you plant hazorim b'dima barina yiktsaru, or whether it's that a generation has to die in order for a new generation to go into the promised land. That's what I kind of saw as the real challenge here. It wasn't the intellectual inability to understand how some things can become pure and some things impure, but it was like this Gordian knot between the necessity for your purity to come at the expense of somebody else's impurity. That's kind of what struck me, and that I will agree with you, Michael. That is a mystery that does have no solution. I'd like to break the knot, but it seems to somehow be written deeply into our DNA.
Also, Geoffrey, that's really beautiful about the dynamic of what we call life and death, and their relationship, and whether they are interdependent on one another or they simply happen. We witness it and try to see the connections between these things. So, you say God was up studying this passage. He might have been enjoying himself. He might have just really finding pleasure in something that becomes a poem rather than a piece of text and a piece of text. He might have just enjoying the wonderful conundrum of that, the unknowability of it. I still stay with that. But I don't know.
The complexity is what makes it so exciting.
You like it.
The complexity is what gives it meaning. If it's not complex, it doesn't really have meaning. If it's too simple, it doesn't have real meaning. It's an interesting idea, Geoffrey.
I mean, from my perspective, if you look at the word chok, and you can look at any lexicon and it will tell you every word, how it's used throughout. I think the most common usage for it is that it is something that is written in stone. It's a law of nature. In Jeremiah, it talks about Chukat v'kochavim, the law of the moon and the stars. If you look at other places, Kings, b'chukot hagoyim, these were established rules. And my sense is here that the tension here, the thing that intrigues us so much and intrigued the rabbis and intrigued those who were polemicizing with them, is how can you break this? How can you change this? And in a sense, to me, it wasn't simply that God was studying the Torah, and I don't see any reason why he wasn't enjoying himself. It doesn't say he was upset, but he was studying the Torah, and he was studying it because there was going to be some sage, because he was studying the Torah of man. So he wasn't studying what was written in his Torah, but the oral tradition that came out of it. And to me, it's almost as though the mystery, the puzzle of this Red Heifer, this Chok that seems to be written in stone, I'm not sure what great sage he was referring to. I would like to think that it was Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva at a certain point says something that is sung from the top of one's lugs at Lag BaOmer. It's considered a very Kabbalistic thing, but it's a beautiful saying that he said. And Rabbi Akiva said, "How fortunate are you, Israel, before whom you are purified, and who purifies you? It is your Father in heaven, and I will sprinkle purifying waters upon you, and you shall be purified." And he says, "Ma mikvah metaher et atmeim, af hakadosh baruch hu metaher et Yisrael." Just as the ritual bath purifies the impure, so too the Holy One, blessed be He, purifies Israel. And from the context that we're studying, it's almost in contradistinction to the Red Heifer, where the mikveh, the pure waters of the mikveh do not become impure when one is sprinkled with them. And of course, if God ultimately is the one who purifies us, God does not become impure by purifying us. And I don't know if this was all part of the tension at this moment in history where the temple was destroyed, where there were new possibilities and there were needs to break out of the old mold. Because I don't think that either Christianity or Judaism successfully broke out of it. Martyrdom was very big in Judaism, and part of the martyrdom was to bring the salvation. And that's the sad part of it. It's one thing to die because one has to for one's faith, but to do it in order to bring salvation, to believe that there has to be a connection between death and giving up one's life in order to bring salvation is what so troubles me. And this Rabbi Akiva beautiful saying seems to me to point at a possible way out.
A possible way out of what?
Well,
the complexity?
No, I think that his model, if you look at it from the perspective of our discussion, does not have anything that is impurified by purification. I think if you look at this saying that it says, "How fortunate are you, Israel," that to know who purifies you. And the idea is that you can be purified, you can have salvation without the need for whether it's the Egel Arufa, the Red Heifer, but also this cycle, this Gordian knot of sacrifice and of death in order to create the potential for life. It kind of came to me as I was reading over this and saw the saying of Miriam's death and the death of tzaddikim could bring life, and knowing even that Rabbi Akiva himself was a martyr. It gives you another route out, but it also makes you understand, I think, what the mystery, the challenge, and what the turmoil of the whole question of the Red Heifer is.
I like that a lot. I like turning the complexity of the Red Heifer into martyrdom. I think those are related topics. I think that's really, really interesting. Thank you so much, Geoffrey. This was an amazingly interesting topic today.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Michael.
Shabbat shalom, everybody, and looking forward to next week.
You got it. Shabbat shalom. See you all then.
Bye-bye.